Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, our guest is Bre Brown, and she's here from Modern Manifestation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Bre, just do a brief introduction, and she'll correct any mistakes I make, and then we'll go from there. So Bre is host of the top-rated Modern Manifestation podcast, a show designed to help ambitious women get practical manifestation and mindset tips to help them pull themselves up the ladder as we work to manifest more success, independence, and financial autonomy. Bre pulls from her experience as a commercial office worker in a male-dominated field to help women build success while embracing their femininity. As a firm believer that true abundance comes from within, Bre's life mission is to help women build a growth mindset that attracts success by focusing on identity, attachments, limiting beliefs, perfectionism, boundaries, manifestation, spirituality, and overall personal development. Bre believes every woman can create her own version of success. So welcome, Bre. We're so glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And now I feel bad for giving you such a long bio to read. I need to work on like a 2-sentencer.
No, I probably didn't need to read all that, but it was still nice. It gives people an idea of who you are from the get-go when they first start listening. So I know I asked you before we started if there were some things I couldn't ask you about, and you said, no, I'm an open book, but if I still start to ask you something you don't want to talk about, just it's okay to say so, because my audience is women who are trauma survivors, and generally from child abuse or domestic violence, but of course, or sexual assault. But of course, trauma is like this big encompassing thing. A guest earlier today, her trauma was like a medical emergency, medical trauma. That was pretty shocking and something difficult to work through. So knowing that that's my audience, is there something about your trauma story that you're willing to share with us today before we talk about what you offer women, which is beautiful?
Yeah. Trauma is one of those topics that I feel like you just can't help but get into the discussion of when you are operating in the world in which I operate in, which is this personal development side, really, because I think that we're finding that our traumas, as you know, are so deeply embedded in how we operate as individuals. And, if you don't feel it, you can't heal it, all of that mentality about trauma. And so as you probably know, we all have our own traumas. And from a sexual trauma perspective, I do have my own story, and I'm happy to share it with you all. And it's for a long time, I actually, excuse me, I have a cough still left over from when I got sick. And for a long time, it's actually not a story that I shared with anyone, because it, for me, on the range of sexual trauma was pretty minor. And yet it was one of those things where it was still something that I carried with me. It was still something that made me fearful of dating for a while. And obviously, I feel like this is a safe space to share it in. But I want to preface my story with saying, when you think of trauma and you think of that range of 1 to 10, like how bad is the trauma, et cetera, the reason I never shared this for a long time with even loved ones, even friends of mine, is just because I felt almost embarrassed, because I was like, well, it didn't actually happen. It was attempted, And so for me, I did have a story associated with that. And it was in my younger 20s. It's right when, this is going to date me a little bit, but it's right when dating apps became a thing. So this was in the world of like Plenty of Fish, OkCupid, Tinder, Bumble didn't exist yet. So that's how far back this goes. And I had gotten out of a very long relationship, and that relationship was physically abusive. And I was trying to get back into the world of being a young 20 that's excited about dating and getting back out there, working on healing that sides of me from that relationship. And then excited about entering a new relationship that would not have those same issues associated with it. And unfortunately, one of the first few people I went on a date with was this guy who was very attractive, very gentle, very kind, very intelligent. And we went on one date or initially, we went on one date. Everything was good. I didn't have any red flags. Second date, he was like, hey, why don't you come over? We can watch a movie or something. And yes, this is probably my naivete, but I, being the younger woman, really just starting to get on these dating apps, didn't really know what like Netflix and chill was. Or, it to me, that wasn't, I honestly thought he just wanted to watch a movie. I didn't realize that.
Well, that's what was said, right?
Right. And, I'm not even 21 yet. I would literally think I was like 19 or 20. And so, and everyone I dated previously on a serious basis anyway, was high school. So it just wasn't what I was ready or used to just yet. And so anyway, I go over there and we start watching a movie and he starts trying to put all these moves on me. And I was very resistant. I was like, hey, I don't know you that well. I'm just not really about this right now. And he just got very, very forceful to the point where he multiple times was trying to force my head in certain positions and was trying to remove clothing from me. And when I tried to run out the door, he blocked it. And all of my skin was tingling. I all of a sudden kind of don't really know what happened, but somehow I was able to get the door open and run out. And he ran after me. But then as soon as I got into the hallway of his apartment, there were people out there and then I felt safe and I just kind of like ran, never talked to him again and got to my car and just like broke down crying and was like shaking and, having that trauma response where all of a sudden all of your body's having to readjust to what it just experienced from a hormone perspective with cortisol and adrenaline and all those things. So that was an experience that I'd had with that. And again, it's one of those things where he didn't actually get to do anything. It was just the threat that he was trying to. And it's, I think I'm so thankful for everything that happened with the Me Too movement, because whenever that started up and people started sharing stories of similar to mine where it didn't actually happen, but it was attempted. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, that is still trauma.
Yeah,
even
is.
Though it didn't happen, that was still trauma. And I never worked through it. I never told anyone. I never called the cops. I never reported him to the dating apps. Like I never did anything because I was like, what am I going to tell them? Like all I could tell them was he tried. And then of course the questions would come up. Well, then why did you go over to watch a movie? You know what I mean? So that for what it's worth, that is a story that I had. I have some others, but that for me is the one that sticks out the most of just like a time when I was very vulnerable in the dating world, not really understanding things, a little bit more naive and felt very taken advantage of. And then also didn't have the tools at the time to deal with that trauma in that moment.
Well, thank you for sharing. I still think it's a pretty vulnerable story. And I think there's lots of listeners that have found themselves in that situation, some lucky enough to escape and others not so lucky. So I think it's worth sharing these things. And what I really don't like about it is it's still like, it's just so typical, right? How even though you weren't harming anyone, you still looked at yourself like, what did I do? And
exactly. Did I misread his text? Did I not pick up on the signs? Did I miss a red flag? I mean, all those things went through my head afterward.
Yeah. And I just want to reassure you, not that you need me to be your therapist, that you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. So anyway,
I appreciate that. Yeah. And I mean, it's funny too. I mean, that happened 11 years ago now. And even I remember a year ago, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just everything going on with the Me Too movement or what, but I found myself trying to find him on LinkedIn to be like, where is he now? Is he in jail? Like I needed to kind of know almost where he was. And I was not successful with it, but it was just interesting to me that I cared enough to still try to figure out, well, where is that guy now? And then I think I was also hoping that I didn't find any articles that he'd done this to someone else, because I think I was in a way trying to just make sure that I didn't put someone else in that same position.
Right. But again, not your responsibility. You didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when I talk about manifestation, I talk a lot about your identity. And I think that it's so important to really not just talk about our traumas, but then also just feel through them. And I'm sure this is all the things that you're doing with with your clients is just making sure that you're allowing that space for them physically so that you're able to process through a lot of those chemical reactions that need to occur. And I'm a huge believer that those sort of traumas, if you know, what you resist persists and it'll eventually come back in some way in your life. And being someone that talks so much about manifestation, I truly believe we have to heal our past traumas in whatever form they took in order to let them go and not carry them with us into our futures. So that way it's important that they're always acknowledged and that they were a part of us. They make up our current identity. And yet we also don't have to allow those to self-sabotage us moving forward. We can progress beyond them. And I think it's important to know that we have the capability to heal those sides of us. It just takes the work to do so.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And you mentioned physical abuse from a past relationship and then this attempted assault. And I think legal definition is probably still considered an assault if he had hands on you, even that trying to force you into movements. But regardless of, I don't know if the labeling is important or not, but regardless of all that, were those the type of experiences that led you to the work you do now?
Not directly. I think more so it's sort of a culmination of all the things in my life. I had older brothers growing up. I've always wanted to sort of defy what it means to be feminine. And my main career is in commercial office leasing, which is very male dominated. And so I think it's really just a culmination of all these things. And being someone that's always identified as more of a women empowerer, someone that's very into women empowerment and someone that's always just wanted to help lift women up. I think a part of it is because I didn't have that same sort of system or support growing up. I love my mom, but we weren't very close. And she was not someone that I looked up to necessarily. And so I didn't really have that female support system. And so as I got in this male dominated industry, I realized even more that I didn't have that support system. And so then I had to go out and seek those relationships. And then I started connecting with all these women that were interested in the things that I were, and they were sharing, they had similar experiences to mine in the workforce. And those experiences, varied in how dramatic they were. But, it's even like the microaggressions that we all experience in our day-to-day lives at work or home, wherever. And so I think a lot of it came from that. But there was a moment where I had to reflect back on my life because I've always identified as more of a, talking about this identity, I always identified as a woman that was strong, courageous, confident. And yet I had this past trauma where I didn't feel like I was those things. I felt I was put in a position by my, physically abusive boyfriend where I felt all those things in my day-to-day life, yet in behind closed doors, I was put into a very different situation where I was in survival mode. And I feel like, if you would have asked me before I was in that relationship, if I would ever find myself in a physically abusive relationship, I would have said, hell no, I will beat his ass if he tries to beat, you know what I mean? Like it was a very different, that's just my personality type. Having all brothers, I'm used to wrestling and fighting. I would have been like, no way in hell will anyone ever put their hands on me sort of thing. But then when you get into that relationship, I think it's harder to see the manipulation happening in real time. It's harder to see how they're grooming you to start accepting certain things. And it happened over a very long period of time. So, it was just these tiny little things month after month that built up. And it's like, oh, well, if you can accept this thing, then you can accept the next thing that's slightly worse. And then the next thing that's slightly worse. At first it starts with emotional manipulation, which is majority of what it was. And then it slowly just progressed until all of a sudden I looked at our relationship was like, how did we get here? I don't remember giving us permission to get to this place. And I didn't have that realization really, or at least that perspective. I remember being in real moment being like, I got to get out of this thing. Like, this is not good. But it took me years later to finally realize how analytical that individual was and how it felt in hindsight that everything was very calculated for me to get to that place. And so I think carrying or having that part of my identity where for a long time I had imposter syndrome within work because I had that experience. And so I was like, well, can I even say I'm a confident woman? Can I even be assertive? Am I strong? Like that was something in my past that always made me question these identities and these beliefs I held about myself. And so then when I got into work, those same questions were coming up. I'm in, in sales. And so you need all those things to be successful. And yet I found that I was really struggling with imposter syndrome because of that past trauma and how I felt it impacted me today. And the beliefs I held about myself were really shaken because of that experience. And so I think all of those things really culminated into what I do now. And I think a big part of why I felt the need to pay it forward is because I did have a woman that really helped me find all that stuff about myself again, reaffirm my confidence, reaffirm my courage and my strength and all those things. And had I not had that woman who has since retired, her whole thing was make sure you pay it forward, make sure you help other women. And so if I hadn't had her, I would have been in a very different place now. I would have been in a very different financial place now because all those things had a direct impact on every aspect of my life, career and finances included. And so I had to unwrap all those parts of my identity in order to get to where I am now. And I just felt, what is the best and most efficient way for me to get this information to other women that might be struggling with the same things, that might want to drastically change their life, but not know where to start, or they have this identity or this belief about who they are, and they're not sure how to unpack that. So I think that's what really I'm so passionate about. And, you mentioned in my bio, I love talking about perfectionism, really anything personal development, but everything associated with your identity and the beliefs that we hold about ourselves are just something that I love getting into, because more often than not, these beliefs that we have aren't true, and yet they're dictating so many things and facets of our life.
Yes, yes.
That's a very long-winded answer to your question, so I apologize.
No, but you answered it. So no, that was really great. And it makes sense, right? It's a compilation of our experiences that shape what we do. And so do you work as an entrepreneur full-time now? Are you doing a couple different things? Like what does your day look like usually?
Yeah, so I am, my 85% of what I do is commercial office leasing. I'm hesitant to say whether or not it is entrepreneur-based because it is sales, it's commission-based, and you're going out and finding your own clients. So from that perspective, it's very entrepreneur-based. And then I also have my podcast, Modern Manifestation, where it really started as a result of the pandemic. And obviously no one was leasing office space at the time. So I was like, well, what am I going to do with all this time? And I've always wanted to start a podcast and talk about some of these things that I love talking about, and found myself having the time. And then I had to really check with myself and say, okay, we've always had this dream of starting this podcast and starting something that would help, propel women forward. We thought it might have taken place after we retired, but here we have this opportunity of time. So the excuse that I've always used, I don't have enough time, all of a sudden went away. So then I had to look at myself and say, okay, well, was that excuse protecting me from my fears? Was it protecting my potential? Or is it something that I don't feel aligned with right now? And then I realized this is coming from a fear place. I was using that element of time, that excuse of time, to not actually do this thing because I felt that I wasn't quite ready. There was something about me that wasn't ready for that yet. And so that was really one of those things, just talking about all the things I do. I had to therapize myself or treat my own self as the client for a moment. And so I started the podcast in 2020 and it's been great. I've loved it. I've actually hit pause on it for the time being, only from the perspective of my work sort of is conflicting a bit. And then a friend of mine and I are going off to create a coaching platform for entrepreneurs that want to start their own businesses. And he's a serial entrepreneur. I have the mindset stuff. We're going to combine and do something together. So the podcast is on hold for right now. But yeah, I'm sorry. I don't even remember your question anymore. Did I answer it?
I can't remember it anymore either. So.
Okay.
So we're going to say yes.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. I think it was, am I mostly an entrepreneur? Let's just say yes.
Okay.
And then I just have different buckets I operate in.
Is your new business venture something you want to talk about here?
We can. There's not a whole lot to talk about just yet, other than a really good friend of mine. He and I really align on a lot of our passions, how we think about life and how we think about starting businesses from a place that is more consciously aligned. And he is really bringing to the table all of the things. He's started multiple businesses that have all been acquired and been very successful. So he has something called the $10 business. And then I have, the mindset topics such, getting over money beliefs and really analyzing your identity around money and, perfectionism. And there's so many topics you could really get into when you're talking about manifestation. And so we're trying to find a way to marry these two things that seem like very different topics, because I think that a lot of what I talk about can sometimes be considered like that woo-woo, I hate to say that word, but it can sometimes
I
come
call it
across that way.
mushy woo-woo.
Yeah, exactly. It can definitely, go into that range a bit. I try to stay more on the logical side of manifestation, but there is some bleed through sometimes. And he's very much here's how to start a business, A, B, C, D. And so while these things seem like polar opposites, we really want to marry the two together and create something for someone that wants to be an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneur that's also interested in the manifestation mindset, spiritual side of it as well. So he and I are hoping to launch that later this year. So if you do go to my Instagram, I'll post all the information whenever it does launch there. But that's really what I'm working on right now. And so I would say it's mostly my, commercial real estate, and then also building this coaching platform right now.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. Yeah. So how did you get into, no, that's not the question I want to ask. Well, who are your teachers on how you got into the manifestation pipeline? Like, how did you learn about it? What did you study maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's no one singular answer. I would say that when I first started working in commercial leasing, my mentor at the time is someone that I felt she gave me a lot of the foundation for manifestation without telling me what it was. And I honestly don't even know. She's since retired and living somewhere else with their grandbaby. So we haven't actually talked about it since she retired years ago. But I've also wondered if she even knew what the concept of manifestation was, or if it was just completely coincidental that a lot of the things she was telling me just happened to be things that they talk about in the manifestation world. And so when I first got in the business, she was giving me all of these books to read. A lot of, I don't know if you've read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill and Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I mean, all of those, right? I kind of consider those manifestation light. I mean,
they are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really like, I think the gateway to manifestation is you start reading those books. And then I am just one of those people. I love to read. I love personal development books. And so I have, the audiobooks going. I have the physical books I'm reading. I'm always listening to something or reading something that's helping me grow, because I just can't get enough of it. So I read those early on at her guidance. And then that slowly just led into all of these other books that I started reading by Eckhart Tolle and Wayne Dyer. And oh gosh, now I'm struggling to remember all the names, but they're Brian Wise. And I just started binging this content. And so I really would say the teachers are the books that I've read. Probably read about 200 books on manifestation and spirituality and mindset. And it's not just limited to manifestation either. Like, I love talking about, or reading, I should say, about how the brain works and how we create patterns in our minds and how we can create new patterns. I mean, I love talking about all of these things, because I think that there's facets of truth in all of these. And I think that the manifestation is really the culmination of all of it. It's talking about our epigenetics. It's talking about our diet. It's talking about, you can't point to one singular thing and be like, that's manifestation. And I think that when people aren't familiar with the concept, and just for anyone listening that isn't familiar with the idea of manifestation, it's that essentially you can create the life that you want based on the decisions and the actions that you take. And so I'm a proponent of, you manifest your identity, your thoughts, which lead to your emotions, which lead to your behaviors. And if you can adjust the thoughts, you can adjust the rest of the chain. And then that can determine what your life looks like in a week, as opposed to if you didn't make any changes. So that's sort of my real quick manifestation. Obviously there's a lot more to it, but let's just leave it at that for a second. And so I believe that all of these things are what make up the idea of manifestation. But unfortunately, a lot of people will watch The Secret documentary as an example, which is fine. But I personally, not to hate on it, but I think it leaves a lot of things out. And I think it makes it feel very magical, which not to say it can't be magical.
It's a great word for it.
Yeah, it was really hard for me as someone that grew up with a father that, had a very mathematical mindset. And I've always very much lived in the logical, practical side of things. I saw The Secret and was like, oh, that's cool. That'd be a neat idea. Yet I don't really fully buy into it. I don't really, this law of attraction stuff, a little out there for me. And so I think that could be an interesting thing to watch and learn about manifestation, or at least get you interested in it. But I wouldn't just stop there. For me,
Right.
I'm
Right.
like, that has some elements to it I agree with, and then it has a lot of elements to it. I'm like, not really. I think there's also another one called like What the Bleep, something like that. Anyway, those two, same sort of bucket. They're fine. They go into a little bit of it, but they also oversimplify, and they don't really talk about how, they just say, if you think about something, you'll manifest it. Well, not necessarily, because what is thinking about something? There's so many other things a part of that. What are your habits? When you're thinking a thought, that doesn't necessarily mean that you feel the feelings. You might think, I'm going to be president, but inside you're freaking out and you're having that moment of anxiety and nervousness. Okay, well, then those two things aren't aligned. So just because you're thinking you're going to be president doesn't
Right.
mean that you actually will be, because internally you're not
Right.
feeling that.
Not a
Whereas
match.
and the documentary is just kind of like, you think it and it happens. It's like, well, no, hold on.
Mm.
there's a whole lot more to that. We talked about all the things we bring with us in those moments, our traumas, as an example, our boundaries, our beliefs, limiting beliefs, what we, believe to be true about ourselves, what we believe we're capable of. We bring all of that into our thoughts. And so that's why I talk so much about mindset, because I believe that your thoughts are really what ends up being the determining factor for what you're able to create for yourself. And anyway, so I've learned about manifestation from really just a series of authors and books. And I've also taken some online courses from Eckhart Tolle and Danny Watson, and trying to think of all the people's names that are escaping me now. But that's really how so really just self-taught.
Mhm.
And, listening into the courses when can. And also, I mean, even teachers that are much more common, like Bre Brown, she even mentions stuff sometimes in her content where I'm like, okay, she's
I
really getting
love
into all
her.
the things that I know, I do too. I selfishly love how close my name is to her.
I noticed that.
I know. So fun fact about that, I have a 713 cell phone number, which is a Houston number, and that's where Bre resides. And there have been many times living in Austin, Texas, where she frequents. There have been many times I've made reservations here with my number, and people were like, oh, I thought it was going to be Bre Brown. I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, also, I think she'd do a little better than just dropping 2 letters from her name. Like, she'd be like Phoebe or something, not just Brie. Like, ooh, no one will ever know.
And she probably would have had her assistant or something make the
Yeah,
reservation.
exactly. Or like Jane Doe coming for a reservation of 7, not just Bre Brown.
No, I appreciate what you shared about The Secret, because I read the book before the movie. And I remember, because I've been a therapist now for 24 years. I don't remember how many years it was before the book came out, but I was really pissed off when I read it. One, because it was like $1 million bestseller, and it was all stuff I knew from just being a therapist, teaching cognitive behavioral therapy. When you work on changing the way you think, it's like one of the basic things. You can, change the outcome of your life. Yeah. So I was a little annoyed that it wasn't really a secret for me, but it did, later as I grew as a therapist, and how I kind of got started with manifestation. Have you heard of Mary Morrissey?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I went to a dream building summit, and it was just
cool.
very helpful for me, because I felt like I had already accomplished all my dreams at that point in my career and in my life. I have the happy family. I have a nice home. I had a thriving career. What else could anybody want, right? And then going to that, it really just created this fire, like, oh my God, I could dream for such bigger things. I don't have to settle for anything.
Right.
So that's how I started my podcast and my business of, group coaching and trying to make a larger impact in the world instead of just one-to-one counseling. So, yeah.
I love that. And I love that you talk about that. I just finished another book by Tasha Silver, and she talks about in this book how we have to individually define what success looks like for us. And I think that's something that's so important because, like you said, we always kind of think of things like our careers and our families, and, there's the things that everyone talks about wanting. And yet we see people all the time on TV reach all of those objectives and still not get to that fulfillment or that place where they feel content and happy. And I'm not saying that that was you, but I'm saying that this happens. And so I think it's important that we define, well, what would success look like for me? Because not everyone needs or wants to be a millionaire. It's like, well, do you really want to be a millionaire, or are you just wanting to travel more? And that's what you think the money of being a millionaire will pay for. Well, there's other avenues to get there without having to slave your life away trying to become a millionaire, And so I think it's always important to have that conversation of, well, define what success means to you. And so, maybe for someone else, it could be that idea, or I feel like for you and I, it was this idea of, well, something that really resonates with my core, something that really resonates with who I am as a person is helping and giving content to people that is helpful and helping people make these changes and utilizing all the things that I've learned to grow and to progress. That's something I'm passionate about. And when I talk about these things, I get so excited and it doesn't feel like work. And I feel like for me, just having the podcast is a huge version of success for me. And I'm sure for you as well, because it's checking that fulfillment box and it's checking that this is something that brings me joy and resonates with who I am as a person and the things that I feel like I wanted to accomplish in this life. But not everyone takes the time to figure out what success would look like for them.
Yeah, really well said. Yeah. So right now in your side hustle, to say it that way, like what are you doing right now or plan to do with the Empowering Woman? Like, do you offer a course, a book, a website? Tell me more about what you're doing with it.
Yeah, so I do have a website. It's themodernmanifestation.com. Super easy. And that's where you'll get all the information too whenever I do start to hit publish on the course I'm working on with Andy, as well as the course that I have that I'm working on individually. And that'll be really a crash course in manifestation and how I think about things and the angle and the perspectives that I choose to focus on when it comes to manifestation and when it comes to generating the success we're looking for. So those two things are not out yet. Both of those things are in process. I keep people updated on my Instagram and podcast as well. When my podcast is in session, like I said, we're on a summer break now, but when it is in session, I have shows that are published every other week. And so that's a great way if you just want some bite-sized nuggets. I'm one of those people. I have like 50 podcast shows I listen to. And I just like, every time I add a new one, it's like, great, that'll be Tuesday evening. That'll be Monday morning. So if anyone wants one that's, I feel like twice a month is fairly digestible. So I have those things going right now. And then there also is a book in the process. And that is probably going to be, and that one it's a little bit of it'll talk more about my personal life and less about how to integrate all these things. But I think it'll kind of lead people into understanding a little bit more about how I got to where I am and all the things manifestation related. So
very cool. Well, once that book is published, please write and let us know because we can add it to the show notes because as you know, our shows live on forever. So anybody in the future listening and they want your book, we'll have the title there for them. Yeah. So before we wrap up, do you have any words of wisdom? I love this word hope. Any wisdom on instilling hope for anybody out there, any woman who's listening and feels kind of stuck right now? Do you have any special advice for them?
Yeah, it's opportune that you bring this up because earlier this month I was feeling stuck myself and had to sit with that and think about, well, why am I in this position and how do I move forward? And I think that my stuckness, and I'm just going to speak about it from the perspective of the situation that I was in, and it may not resonate with everyone, but there might be a couple people that tune in and this is where they're at, is I feel like I've been doing all the personal development and really working to heal all the different facets. And I think at some point I got stuck and felt like I was in this place of losing passion, I guess, if you will, or feeling like I was always doing all the things and had felt like I hadn't yet progressed to where I wanted to be. And I had this realization via a conversation with a friend of mine who's also a coach. And she asked the question, she was like, well, where's the stuckness coming from? And I was like, I'm not where I think I should be based on all the things that I have done. And I'm just really feeling overwhelmed right now and a little unmotivated and disappointed with my current progress. And this is something I've heard from others. So I'm hoping it resonates with some of your listeners as well. And the question she asked me was a really profound one. It was, well, it sounds like you're doing a lot, but you're not being. And I had to sit with that for a minute and be like, wait, hold on, say that again. I'm doing, but I'm not being. And that's when I had to take a moment and step back and really reflect and say, that was very true. That was what I needed in that moment. I am doing all of the things. I'm doing the journaling. I'm doing the gratitude. I'm doing the vision boarding. I'm doing this, that, and the other. I'm meditating. I'm doing the workouts. I'm doing the clean eating, all the things that we put on our list of this is what a, successful or a person that's trying to manifest should be doing, right? We should all over ourselves. And so I had to take a moment and say, you know what? I'm doing the thing that I've always suggested people don't do, which is I'm doing too many activities, but I'm not actually sitting with them long enough to make an impact on my internal being. I'm operating in the external and not the internal. And so while I think all those things are important, I think journaling and vision board and all those things can be helpful and important. They're only as helpful as you allow them to impact you internally. And I found that I was in a way performing by doing those things. Even though no one was watching me and I wasn't posting about it, I felt like I was just doing the things I should be doing as someone in my position, but I wasn't actually
through the
feeling
motions.
Right, exactly. Was not feeling into those activities. And so that really helped me get over that hump and really gave me hope again, because then I was like, I don't need to be doing anything that doesn't bring me passion and that doesn't feel aligned with me in the moment. And so I just cleared off my plate and was like, okay, well, what are the things I actually feel aligned right now? What are the things that I feel like that make me feel good, that make me feel like the type of person that is going after the things that I want, that is capable of achieving those things? And all of a sudden it went from 20 things to 3 things. And that was that helped release my anxiety. That helped me just improve so many things because, I talk about perfectionism and this black or white, all or nothing mindset. I'm going to do all these things or I'm going to do absolutely nothing and binge Netflix all day.
Are you talking about me again?
This is all of us, right? And I have a habit as a recovering perfectionist of doing that as well. And so I was like, okay, well, let's just pare it down. Can I do these 3 things? Not every day. Can I do these 3 things once sometime throughout the week? And then that relieved a lot of pressure on myself because I found out that my stuckness, my my lack of motivation came from the fact that I was just doing too much without actually allowing it to make any internal change. And I was putting too many things on my to-do list for the sake of having a to-do list that made me feel good and productive, as opposed to, and more like productively procrastinate, as opposed to just allowing me time to be, which if you've ever read any of Eckhart Tolle's or books or listened to his sessions, he always talks about how you get to a place of being where all of a sudden you're connecting with that parasympathetic system. You're allowing yourself to calm down. You are then connecting with what he calls your higher self, your connection to source, but you're allowing yourself to actually calm down and not live in that go, 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 very fight or flight sort of response. And you're coming back to this like rest and digest, this calm, this place that allows you to reset. And it actually allows you to escape that burnout, because then you're coming back to a place of centeredness. And so when I found that and was able to go back to, okay, forget everything that is the doing, I can outsource these things. And then the things that I can't outsource, are they really important? And really then I had to sit and say, okay, well, the things that are really important are giving myself this time for rest, or giving myself these times of moment of pause and reflection and connecting with the things that I want to connect with more meaningfully. And that helped me get my hope back. And it really helped me get my motivation back as well, because I realized that it wasn't anything I was doing incorrectly. It was the fact that I was doing too much and I had to bring it back in, and I had to realign and get everything back centered. Because as you know, the parasympathetic controls your hormones and everything else. And so if you let that get, if you're overstimulated in that sympathetic system, then it's obviously very likely that you start feeling a lot of those feelings of burnout and helplessness because you're not allowing yourself to come back. So again, a very long-winded answer to your question. So just be more, do less. That's my little, that's the thing.
And I know everybody's like 3 things that they would have on their list would be different, but I'm guessing listeners like myself are curious what your 3 things are.
3 things you mean on my list?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I was like, what 3 things in my life? The things that bring me joy? Yeah. So one thing that is probably number one on the list is meditation. And if I'd heard myself say that 2 years ago, I would have rolled my eyes and been like, oh, this is one of those meditation bitches. Um, but I will say and it was hard as hell doing it for the first 2 months even.
Oh my God, yeah.
And everyone calls it a meditation practice. And I think I always like ignored that whole part of it. I was like, oh, it's just meditation. Like how hard can it be to sit and do nothing?
Hard.
And right, it is really hard. And that's why they call it a practice, because you're not going to be good at it for a long time. Plan to be really crappy at meditation for a bit. Like I even feel like now I'm still pretty crappy at it, but I'm improving every day. And that's the point of meditation. And I think meditation in a huge way is a metaphor for life. And it's a great tool, especially for my perfectionists out there that live in that all or nothing mindset. Meditation is something that will put you out of your comfort zone. It is something that will make you frustrated. It is something that will make you annoyed with yourself. And that's important to feel and experience.
Yeah.
So meditation is number one on my list because it made me realize all the things about myself that I didn't like, all the things about my identity that I carried with me. So numero uno is 100% meditation. And I felt like getting on the soapbox for a minute about that because
it was beautiful.
So many people,
yeah.
Well, so many people don't want to do it because they're like, I just don't like it. Well, you're not supposed to like it.
All right.
I say that.
Count. No, it will
right. And I will say, like, even now, I don't love meditating, but I appreciate what it does for my body. And I appreciate how it's allowing me to evolve because as I go through this personal development journey, sometimes meditation, while I'm, working on that, I'll get really frustrated with something and I'm like, oh, there's something here. I wouldn't be frustrated right now if there wasn't something here that I need to still work on. So it can also be very helpful with that. So anyway, that's number one on the list. Number two is journaling. Again, not something that I love doing, but I have found that rage journaling, anytime there is something I need to work through, is one of my favorite things to do. And I literally have pages in my journal where they're almost all black from pen scribbles where I'm just like, just need to scribble the shit out of this page. And I'm just very angry. And it's like I'm beating up that piece of paper. I have several pages throughout my journal that are like that, where I'm like, I'm just so angry. I don't even want to put words on the page. I just want to freaking do all these squigglies. So I have those. And I found that that's very helpful for me to process and work through things in real time and allow myself to feel those emotions safely. Or I also like it whenever I just start writing with nothing intended and I just let my brain go and I just let each word fall on the page as it will. And I don't care if it's legible. I don't care if it makes sense. I don't care if it's in English. I can just kind of go and
how many languages can you write in?
Well, sometimes it's like, it doesn't even matter. I mean, I might just put some random freaking letters on the page because they just need to come out and that's fine. But I think I used to get so wrapped up in the idea of, well, this needs to be a perfectly written little summary of abstract of how I'm feeling today. And that's not what it is. It's supposed to be this messy thing that half the time I can't even read it back to myself. And that's okay. It did what it needed to do. Mm-hmm. And when I can, sometimes it's really interesting to be like, oh, I didn't realize I felt that way. My subconscious just put something on this page that's a revelation to me. So those two things are something that every single week I want to do that. At least for some amount of time. And then the third thing is just movement. And I say movement because I'm someone that's very into body positivity and intuitive eating and just really listening and gut checking with your body. And so I used to be one of those people that had to work out every single day. And now I'm one of those people where I just say, can I move my body today in some way? Can I go on a quick walk? Can I do stretching? Can I do yoga? Maybe I do feel like a workout, but really listening to my body and what my body's telling me it's ready for in that day, listening to my hormones, listening to where I am with my, digestive system, just really taking all that into account and rebuilding that physical connection to my body, which is something I lost a while ago. So those three things are most important for me is meditation, journaling, and then checking in with my body to determine appropriate movement.
Beautiful. I hope that blesses someone listening.
Yeah.
Oh, and while we're on this, maybe I can share, there's 4 things I recommend when people are grieving or really stuck and overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And so in case it's somebody listening, because I just said it to a client today, the 4 things I recommend when you're feeling this way are your nutrition, your hydration, movement, and sleep. So if you can't do anything else, try to do stuff in those 4 areas because that will start to help you feel better. Getting those greens in, getting enough water in, and I need to work on drinking more water just today even.
I know. I was like, if only my teenage self had known how important all those things are to your hormones, which have such an impact on how we operate as individuals. Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could have avoided so many things.
Well, Bre, it's been a pleasure to have you on here today. Any parting final words before you already mentioned your website, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And anything else that we forgot to discuss that you want to bring up?
No, I think that really covers it. If you want to get to know more about me or want to tune into some other topics around manifestation specifically, or even some of this identity work I talked about, you could check out my podcast, Modern Manifestation. It's gray with a little side profile of my face, a little icon. Other than that, yeah, check out my website or just following me on Instagram is probably the best way to get in touch with me. I actually respond to my DMs. It's probably something I'll have to phase out at some point. But for right now, I'm still checking my DMs if you just want to pop in and say hi.
Good to know. All right. Well, thank you again so much for being here today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me, Karen.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.